All right, great. And I am going to share my screen. Okay. All right. And I'm just going to move the images. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our first Saltese webinar for this semester. The title is ComPAIR, Using Assessment to Support Learning with James Charbonneau from UBC. So I'm Phoebe Jackson. If you haven't met me before, I'm a Saltese Fellow and a John Abbott College physics teacher, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. So before we go ahead, I'm just putting a link in the chat to the Saltese events page. This is our first, but not our last webinar for the semester, so you can see what's coming up. At the end of the month, actually, Liz, I can't remember the specific day. It's Friday at 2:30.
The 25th.
February 25th, there we go. We have a webinar on improving the quality of your test questions through the use of learning objectives and backwards design. It's going to be led by Melissa Sakari, Rebecca Orr, and Michael Rodriguez, all who work for the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, and it promises to be very interesting. So you can check out the Saltese events page in the chat. Okay, so after a short introduction from me, James is going to take over. James Charbonneau is an associate professor of teaching in the Department of Physics and Astronomy at UBC. He's also the Associate Dean of Students, a two-time Killam Teaching Award winner, and one of the developers and users of ComPAIR, an open source teaching technology that scaffolds students in the process of peer feedback through the use of comparisons. So now I'm going to talk, before I give you over to James, just a little bit about why comparisons. Actually, I'm not going to talk. I'm going to let this talk for me for a minute.
One of these things is not like the others. One of these things doesn't belong. Can you tell which thing is not like the other by the time I finish this song?
All right, thank you, Sesame Street. Comparing. This is all about comparing today. Comparing is fundamental to how we learn. As suggested by that Sesame Street video, we learn by making comparisons when we are very young. But as we're going to talk about today, we continue to learn by making comparisons right up into adulthood and beyond. So the process you see here on this slide is a suggested mechanism from the cognitive sciences for how the act of comparing contributes to learning. It goes something like this. We develop a concept by identifying what belongs and what doesn't, like in Sesame Street. So a rabbit has fur and long ears. I'm looking at an animal with fur and long ears. Maybe it's a rabbit. But all the rabbits I know have ears that stick up, and this one has ears that hang down. So maybe it's not a rabbit. Or maybe I need to broaden my concept of a rabbit to include ears going up and down as long as the ears are long. So as we continue to develop our concepts, we start to connect them to other concepts. We categorize, we form networks of categories. From these, we build relationships. And then using these relationships, we build prototypes for our concepts. So by prototypes, I mean the best example of a particular concept. For example, my prototypical rabbit includes, it has short white fur, long ears that stick up, black eyes. Okay, and finally, we use these prototypes that we have learned to continue to engage in new comparison activities. So why would we bother having students engage in comparison activities in our classes if, according to cognitive science, they are constantly doing it anyway, no matter how we teach? As educators, we know that our understandings of what we teach are quite different than our students' understandings at first. So that's exemplified here in the diagram with the two circles. The dark green is the teacher's understanding of a concept, and the lighter green is the student's understanding of the same concept. But that's probably much too simple for what really goes on in our class. Maybe it looks a little more like this. So we may consider it our job to bring the student's understanding in line with our own. And after a really good class, we might feel that we've actually succeeded, only to realize after marking the homework assignment that students' conceptualizations still vary wildly. Our students have been building their networks of concepts over many years, drawing on countless unique experiences in the world and interactions. We're never going to be able to make their understandings the same as our own, but it is possible to bring about conceptual change. And as we've just been discussing, comparing is essential to this process. We often ask our students to look at things in our class, and we assume that they're seeing the same deep structural features that we are. But what they see as important might be quite different than us, and it might be superficial. If we want to help them deepen their understandings of what matters and what doesn't, one way is to engage them explicitly in the process of comparing, guiding them through what connections matter and which ones are superficial. So in particular, one place where teachers and students' concepts differ quite a bit is how we understand the criteria and standards of our assessments. What makes something high quality and something else poor quality? How can students better learn our criteria so that they can create their own high quality work, and in doing so have better learning outcomes overall? This is where James and ComPAIR come in. So James, I'm going to hand it over to you now. I'll stop sharing and you can start.
Okay, great, thank you. Let me just organize my windows here on one desktop. So, okay, and I want to make sure I've got chat available. There it is. Okay, so I can see folks. Yeah, so thank you very much for inviting me. It's a real honor, and this is a wonderful seminar. Thank you very much. Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about ComPAIR, this tool that we developed at UBC. I'll be doing it fairly informally, so I encourage questions in chat and questions just while I'm talking. But I do have a few slides that I might hold off on certain questions until we get to that point. But yeah, feel free to ask things. So just to give you an idea of the ComPAIR team, can everyone see my slides? Are they showing? Is everyone?
You look good.
It's all good. Okay. So ComPAIR, I'll talk a bit about the design later because there was some interest in one of our pre-meetings about how it was designed. But really, the core team is listed here, and it really started with a grant from Tiffany Potter, Mark McLean, and Simon Bates at UBC. And then I was added because I was teaching an online course actually, and I needed to facilitate a specific assignment that I had in mind for doing online learning. So this was before COVID and the pandemic. I was teaching an asynchronous online course, and so they brought me in, and I got brought in almost right away. And one of the things that's really unique about this is that there was faculty input, there was programmer input, and there was evaluation input right from the very beginning, the very first meeting. And then these are the folks who are really involved. I'm going to give a special shout out to Letitia. Letitia England. She's really been the backbone of this whole project and really taken it on and made sure it went forward. So what I'd like you to do is just take some time to think about how you would describe this figure. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a waterfall. So maybe just type something into chat, but don't press enter yet. Just type a short description, but don't hit enter, and I'll give everyone a bit of time to just say how they would describe this. And then I'll do a countdown and everyone can hit enter and we can see what everyone says. And then I'll give us some time to look over it. So maybe just 30 more seconds to think and type. Okay, let's hit enter and let's see what everyone. Okay. Yeah, and just maybe maybe I should have put a horizontal ruler or something in there, but let's just scroll back and everyone can order. So I'm seeing a lot of rectangle, 3x3 boxes, contains one letter from A to I, the first letters. Yeah. Okay, so a lettered graph. Okay. This is great. So I guess maybe I won't do the waterfall for this next one, but well, maybe I'll just open it up. So if I give you these two figures now, what features might pop out that you might not have noticed before? And maybe just put them in the chat. We won't do a waterfall. We can just. Oh, a waterfall. Sorry, a waterfall is when you let everyone wait to hit enter, and when everyone hits enter, all the chat goes by like a waterfall. Sorry. Yeah, so there's some good stuff. So there's the transpose. So one of the things that is become clear now is that the rows have become columns. And so this points out you know, the mathematical operation, the transpose, right? When you take the rows of, say, a matrix, or the columns, and switch them with the rows and vice versa. But also one thing that comes out, as is pointed out, is the uneven column width. And so this just goes to show two things that comparisons can do. Is a well-chosen comparison can highlight features that we would maybe never notice, or we wouldn't notice as novices in a field, but an expert would notice they're important. And so I really like this. I really like this picture. This picture is actually from yeah, the sequencing of the letters is vertical. Exactly. Yeah, that's what I mean by the transpose. The transpose takes ABC and then takes the row. Can you see my cursor when I'm in this view? I don't. Can you? Okay. So it takes my the row and turns into a column, and it takes this one and turns into that column. Yeah. So this picture is actually from Rethinking Transfer by Branford and Schwartz. This is one of my favorite papers. It has a wonderful little section on comparisons and why we do them. But really, it's just what I like to think of as they set the stage for future noticing. They point out things that we might miss otherwise. Comparisons are also great for another reason. Comparisons are relatively easy for novices. This is one of the reasons why A/B testing is such a big thing in usability. One of the things that what we notice at the top here is evaluating is really close to the top of the Bloom taxonomy. So it's an expert-like skill and something that we would think students would develop a lot later. But what was noticed and what was sort of done with Thurston's law of comparative judgment, which is from this paper, the psychology paper in the late 20s, 1920s. I guess I'm going to have to start distinguishing that. Is that it's very hard for a novice to be given a bunch of things of varying quality and to make a ranked list of those, or to be given one thing of a certain quality and be able to give that a score of, say, 7 out of 10 or 6 out of 10. What's the difference between 6 and 7 out of 10? It's really subtle, and it's a very difficult thing for novices to do. So what comparisons do is they sort of bring it more into relief by taking that question and saying, well, which one is better given some criteria, right? And Thurston, in his original paper, you know, the intent of doing it was to evaluate performances of, say, music or fine Persian rugs, right? You can look at them and you can compare them and you would say this one's better than that one, but you don't really know why, because, well, I can't, at least. I'm not an expert in either. So this is where ComPAIR comes in. ComPAIR was the software that we developed at UBC to really facilitate this in the classroom, to facilitate comparisons. So I'm going to give you some time to actually look at this demo. So we have this sandbox site that you can go. So I just popped it into chat there. There's three accounts that you can look at. You can pick the student account. There's an instructor account as well. The administrative account is less interesting for us, and really it's for the people who are running the system at your home institution. Yeah, so there's this software. I just want to point out a couple things, and then we'll sort of debrief. One of the things about this software is it was designed using this thing called Agile participatory design. And really, what this is just a fancy way of saying that everyone was involved from early on, right from the beginning. And I'm doing this to just show you. So we had our first meeting in June, and I drew this picture after our first meeting for what I thought this piece of software should look like. In August, the programming team had a minimal viable product, and it went live in my class in September. So I was using this in a class of about 50 people for a third-year physics course. So the students were really involved right off the bat on how this was designed from their end, and I was using it in teaching right off the bat. And one of the things about knowing the design team is I knew the front-end developer, I knew the back-end developer, I knew the people who were responsible for the UI. So I knew exactly who to talk to get something fixed. And so we were able to iterate super fast on this. Another thing that I just want to point out is my own personal philosophy that I was trying to push into this software while it was being designed. It is often different from the design philosophy of many people who program. One thing is I wanted to make it very simple. I wanted it to do one thing, and this really does one thing. It just facilitates comparisons for students. So I wanted to do one thing simple, like a clicker. I also didn't want to prevent instructors from using it wrong. One of the things that we were constantly butting up against is we'd have a use case, and then programmers would say, okay, let's make it for this use case and then exclude all other cases. And I wanted people to be able to use the tool whichever way they wanted. So it is this very simple kernel of an idea. So maybe I'll just go back. So yeah, maybe the thing to do is to give folks some time to. I'll just share my screen to go into ComPAIR. So you click on student. This, you can do anything you want in it. This resets every day at 2:30 in the morning Pacific time. So you can't really, anything you do, or I guess it's 3 now. There's actually a note up there now. But you click on your course and you can see your assignments. And the first one to sort of do is maybe just what is the best film of all time and answer. And this will take you through sort of the process of what it's like for a student to answer a question in this thing, and then do a comparison. This is already populated with some answers, but your answers that you put in here will be available to other people in the comparison, just so you know. So the comparisons are done from peer comparisons from the submitted thing. So you can put in an answer and maybe just go through. So I'll give some folks some time to do that. And just play around a bit. Maybe I'll give you, I always say 7 minutes because it's just it's a number between 5 and 10. So I'll say 7, and then we'll see how we feel after a few minutes of playing around. If you have questions, throw them into chat and I can answer them, or feel free to put up your hand to make a comment. And I'll take this time. Yeah, enter as students, Joan. I think that's the best thing to give a feeling for what this is like. I find it the easiest way to see what the students experience, and then you can think about how you would want to use it in your class. I think that's the easiest way. The instructor side is interesting, but not as illuminating. It doesn't show the process of what it's like to actually do it. So once you answer, you can click the button compare pairs, and that'll take you to the comparison phase.
James, when I go in, it actually just gives me a student account that's already answered. Is there a way to go in and get an account that hasn't answered?
It has a student account that's already answered.
Yeah, like I went in and I'm looking at student view, and it's just showing me pre-existing accounts with pre-existing answers.
Oh, are you in instructor view?
Maybe I am, but when I try to get out, it.
Yeah, so if we go back to the very beginning, the link, oh yeah, so we have to log out. So if you click up here, you can log out, and it'll take you back to that top. And there's 3 options, and
Okay.
you'll want to actually answer, you'll want to click student.
Okay,
And
great.
and that'll take you to what students see when you set it up. But after you go through the comparisons, oh, thank you. Yeah, so after you go through the comparisons, so you put in your favorite, and you submit, and then you actually go to the comparisons, and you pick which one. Oh, yeah. Alien, like it. Mary Poppins. I'm gonna have to pick Alien. But then you can give feedback. So there's an opportunity to give feedback. One thing I will say is, so which is better, and the criteria, you can have multiple criteria, and you can change this question as an instructor. So you can make it actually not just which is better, but you can lay out some criteria for judging or comparing. And then you can type in both, and then you submit. And then one of the things that you can turn off or on is a self-evaluation. You can, after looking at everyone else's answers, so we only did 1 round of comparisons. In my classes, I often have students do 3, where they see 6 assignments in total, and they compare 3 of them. But you can give feedback to yourself just to reflect on your answer based on others. And maybe mine was like, I could have made an argument maybe for why Pulp Fiction was the best. But I won't do that. I'll just say I'll just say gibberish, and then yeah. So that's really the whole process, and that's the whole thing, the whole thing to it. Okay, so I will get back to my slideshow here. Okay. So yeah, I already talked about these design things, and I have these slides just in case internet doesn't work. One thing I'd like to talk about for the next little while is just about the kind of courses that are using this right now. So ComPAIR is used, I think it's actually in 70 courses now. We just look at logs and keep track of statistics, but so it's at least 60 courses and 7,000 students in these courses. There are instances, so this is an open source piece of software. We maintain ours. It hooks into our LMS at UBC, which happens to be Canvas. It uses LTI to hook into that LMS in case people are interested in that. But we have installations at so Western, Waterloo, University of Brunswick, many places. And at UBC, these are some of the courses that are using it. I just wanted to show that this tool, I think because the initial design team was quite diverse, and we had this idea to keep things simple. It can be used for a lot of stuff, everywhere from fine arts. So one of my favorite is a fine arts where people just literally put their work up. and they compare works based on it. It tends, so just to, it works really well where there's gray area. So you'll notice that it is used in first year math courses, but it's hard to use, and it's hard to come up with the right kind of question to use, because you don't want the question to be like, what is the value of this derivative or something like that, because that has a very clear answer, and this is not the tool to kind of do that kind of thing. But maybe writing a solution, and who has written the clearest solution to a complex problem, or is drawing a picture, might be, oh yeah, X-rays or scans would be, yeah. So it's very versatile and is used in many places. So I'm going to give 3 examples. One is in first year literature. The second is a first year science peer review. So it's in a first year science program, but doing peer review of research work. And then a third year physics problem course, which has synthesis and problem solving. So the last example is, so the second and third example are from my courses. The first one is from Tiffany Potter's course, one of the other profs working on this project. So the example, this is English 110. This course doesn't exist at the university anymore. I think it's called Words 150 now, but it's the idea is this here. So the basic structure that Tiffany had for this is that students would create a 2-sentence critical premise for this statement, discuss the significance of Shakespeare's representation of human ambition in The Tempest. A critical premise is the same as a thesis statement. I didn't know that until, but it's the new language that they're using for that. The students then they go and they submit it on ComPAIR, and they submit all of their thesis statements or critical premises. They complete the comparisons, and the comparisons are graded. So the submissions are graded by the prof. The feedback to each other is graded by the prof or a TA. And then they come back to actually work on it in groups based on the feedback they've given and the feedback or the other versions that they've seen. They try to improve theirs as the start of an essay. And so this is really a formative aspect, building this and building this critical premise and building this statement to prepare them for a midterm essay question and a project. And so it's used as a step, a formative step in a bigger assignment. One of the things that I really like about this is Tiffany has them rank it on two different scales. One is originality, so you can choose which one is more original, and the other one is which is better written. And so these two things are, quite orthogonal to each other, and one might be very original but poorly written, right? And so it allows you to tease that out. And I guess one thing I should say that I don't really highlight too much in this talk is in the background, there is something called adaptive comparative judgment working in the background. There's an algorithm that pairs assignments together. And so when at the beginning, the assignments are just paired randomly, but as one assignment gets chosen over the other, they get scored, and we actually use ELO, which is ELO. I shouldn't call it ELO. It's ELO. It's named after a person from chess to actually to rank things. And so there is a ranking that comes out of this, but I don't think it. I'll talk about using it for grading and the purposes of it later. But there is this sort of algorithm going in the back. And I guess a part of this is that I like to point out is the timing is such, and it's a robust enough system that you could actually do this assignment in class. And though Tiffany does it like this now, she actually originally had the first half hour of a tutorial of people actually typing and doing this in class, doing the comparisons, and then the second half of the tutorial actually debriefing and going through it. So it is something that you could actually do in class and overcome these fairly intimidating barriers of giving your peers feedback directly to their face, right? Which is particularly difficult in your first year. The second example I have is also a writing assignment. So this is from a program at UBC called Science 1. It's so it essentially replaces first year science at UBC for a group of students. And And they have, it's a small cohort program, and they have 2 capstone projects. And their first capstone project is taking a piece of primary literature and then trying to write a pop science article based on that piece of primary literature. So students pick from a pool of primary literature, and they're given a mentor, one of the faculty who teach in the program. So we each have about 8 students that we mentor through this project. And they're trying to write this article, and as part of the process is they actually submit their article to ComPAIR, and they look at what kinds of things other people have done for this project. So they all have different projects by design. So each person is only allowed to pick 1 paper from the pool, and 1 paper can only go to 1 person. But really what they're looking at is the structure. How does the structure of this article compare to the structure of this article, and what's more effective? And what we find is it gets to these really sort of big picture ideas rather than sort of worrying about grammar and stuff. They worry more about the big ideas and the big overall structure of these. So they do the comparisons, and they see 6 papers in total. And then they use that feedback to submit a final version. And for the term 2 capstone project, which is actually a measurement project, we do it here too. They actually submit a letter to the editor, and we're trying to teach them about the peer review process and stuff like that. So yeah. The third example I have is an example from Physics 323. It's a 3rd year climate and energy course for majors and non-majors in physics. So I use ComPAIR almost as the whole, the summative aspect of my assignment, where the previous 2 were sort of formative, right? So I first, use ComPAIR to ask students what question would you like this course to answer, because they often are it's a climate and energy course, and I want to sort of tailor some stuff to them. And then I pose a problem. I take that and I pose a problem, and we work on it on Piazza. And so the first week we just spend, okay, we have this complicated problem. What do we need to do to understand this problem? And we all work together on Piazza trying to unpack what we need to know. The second week we try to, okay, now that we know what we need to understand, why don't we try to make a plan of how we're going to tackle this calculation? And then the third week is where ComPAIR actually comes in. It's where they actually take all of this information that's on Piazza, and they have to synthesize all of it and make a write-up of this problem. And then they go through the comparisons. And what's interesting about this is because all the students were involved in creating the Piazza and they're all sort of experts in this problem, and they can give really good feedback about what is good and what is bad in these. And then there's also a self-reflection. So I just have some of the steps written out to give a feeling for, so here's where I get the question. And the question that this student submitted was, how much fuel emissions per year would be reduced if all the vehicles in our local cities switched to electrical transmission? And this one was fairly highly voted. So this is a place where I use the ability, the pairwise ranking that's generated to pick the top ranked or close to the top ranked one. And then here are the comments from other students saying how they like this question. And then I turn this into a question that fits the material that we're learning in class, that we're doing in class. So I often link CO2 to the change in temperature of the atmosphere, because that's one of the learning goals in the course. And then students discuss on Piazza, and I just do this to show how into the discussion the students are. So here's the scroll bar on this Piazza, and this is week 1 of this. And here they're trying to just figure out, what do we need to know? What are we trying to figure out with this problem? And then the submissions are very good. And I'm just showing it to give you an idea of what they look like. We do have to worry about content at some point, but I want you to give a feeling like this is a very good one. This is a 4-page physics calculation that has full paragraphs and writing, and it looks more like physics than pretty much anything that happens in any of my other classes, and I'm always really excited about it. And they talk about whether or not their answer is any good. They talk about their assumptions, why they made those assumptions, where it comes from. And then what students do is they use a rubric to evaluate each other's work. And then okay, so students use a rubric to evaluate each other's work, but the only thing I grade in this whole thing is I don't actually grade their assignments. I grade the feedback that they give to other people. I grade the quality of the feedback that they give to other people. And I never actually grade the content of their assignment. There's a lot of other course elements that grade content. What I'm trying to do is get them to the process. So I grade Piazza participation as well, with a rubric as well. So this gives you essentially ideas of 3 assignments, 3 types of assignments that we use. So I maybe like to just right now take and open it for some questions in case I feel like I've been talking a lot. So some questions or comments if there are any, and then we can talk about some of the research that we've done on this. Yeah, Daniel, how are you doing?
Yes, hi, James. Thank you. This is I'm very excited to learn about this tool. Do you know about My Daylight? Have you heard of it?
Is this is this Liz's software? Yes,
yeah,
okay.
This is something similar we have at Dawson, and I can see that there's a lot of overlap. And one element that I like about both of these is the idea of like upvoting. Like there's a sort of a wisdom of the crowd that sort of, the best answers rise to the top. And I can definitely see the pedagogical value of it. One idea that I had just as you were presenting was I like at the end of not necessarily each class, but to ask students like, what's the most important point that you learned? And that could be a really interesting way here, because then just 5 minutes, like look at it and then see how they interact with each other. And then you'd have a pretty good summary after that. If you got 40 people entering into it, big bullet points or takeaway points from a class. So that's one way that you could apply it as well.
That's a really wonderful idea. And one of the things that one of the really basic things about this, and one of the reasons I was trying to get something like it for my online course is online, it's really hard to look at other people's work. But even if you're in in-person classes, you only ever really see the work that your friends do. You don't see the work that other people are doing. And so this gives just exposure to how other people are thinking about it. I think, your end of class sort of recap is the same kind of thing. Like people might have very different takeaways. It's a really cool idea.
Yeah, and I mean, I really benefited from working with, Liz and the active learning group here at Dawson on the importance of just taking a moment every now and then to have the students recapitulate what they understand. And, you had Bloom's taxonomy up before. And I mean, this is like, if you were to ask that question with this platform, then you're getting in actually on many levels, because you're helping them to understand and to remember, but then they're also evaluating at the same time.
Sure.
And just maybe one practical thing, you probably get this question a lot, but is there a way to integrate this into Moodle?
I do not know. I don't know Moodle well enough. Is Moodle? I don't even know what Moodle is. Is it an LMS or is it?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think Moodle uses LTI. I'm remembering this from the pre-meeting, and this uses LTI as well, the learning technology interface. So they should be able to integrate quite easily. Yeah. And I see Michael has his hand up there.
I was just going to add to that. Yeah, it's LTI. So you can create an external tool in Moodle to launch directly into it.
Okay, great. Because I've really found Moodle to be a good platform, and I really like all these new tools, but then it can get confusing for students where to go unless it's kind of a one-stop shop. And I like, when things get graded and put into the gradebook automatically, and, working a little bit more efficiently that way.
Yeah, for sure. And I should say especially that first semester was super rough, because it was, and then after a couple of years, it got a lot easier. I'm just seeing a lot of questions come up in chat. Is it possible to compare short videos? Yeah, so you can put a link to a video Often what people do is they'll, I don't think there's a built-in video viewer. There's built-in image viewers, but I don't know if there's a built-in media player. But often people, post to YouTube and then link to YouTube. They were thinking of building a video viewer, but I'm not sure if they have yet. We need a secret share key. Patty, maybe that's a question to ask, that we can talk about later. You wouldn't need to if you had the installation at your home institution. You wouldn't have to, because it would just go through LTI and it would work in whatever they use to log into the LMS. They would log in and populate this. Can we compare a student's work with themselves? No, not really, Phoebe. And one of the things, so when a student submits something, they get given work that is not theirs. So they will never see their own assignment. So that wouldn't be built in, but it's something that you could do after. So one of my design philosophies for this was teachers can do a lot of things and give a lot of instructions outside of a tool. And so I think if there's a way that you could think of using this to facilitate that, it's unlikely that it's built into the tool though. The tool is very, very simple. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, Phoebe, or not.
It was Midhat's and Kathy's question.
Oh, yeah.
But I think it does. So just so everyone understands, you can't decide what students see.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you can't decide what students see. So students it's random and anonymous. And the feedback that you give to students, that students give to each other, is all anonymous as well. So that's not shared. Okay, great, Liz. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, Jean-Francois.
Hi. Just a quick question. Sorry about that, bad timing on my wife's part. So just a quick question. So, we answered the example you gave with the best movie. We answered, and then basically there was the comparison. So what I was wondering is, how is the experience different for the students who answer these first compared to students that would come later in the class? In other words, how is it populated at first?
Yes. Okay, this is a good question. So the way the film question worked is you had access to comparisons right after you answered. I never do that in my classes. I always have a window for submissions and everybody submits. And then I close that window and I open up a comparison window. So one of the reasons to do this is to make, because you might think the super keen students maybe answer early. And so the comparisons you're doing are on sort of this biased set of students. During the comparison phase, at the beginning, the pairing is random if you have the adaptive comparative judgment algorithm on. It'll be random, and then after the first round, it'll start doing the algorithm. You can just turn that off completely and make all pairings random. We have talked a lot about like, hey, can we do other kinds of pairings? Can we be cute and clever about how we do it? And we just never done it. But because we're trying to get the main idea to work really well. But what that means is the people who compare early with the algorithm on might have an easier time, because as the comparisons go, what the algorithm is doing is if two things are scored very similar, it'll give it to a person and have them pick to distinguish. And so the late comparisons are often the harder ones, but maybe those are the ones that are very, very subtle, right? And I think, people always say like, well, or not always, but sometimes wish they like, oh, I think these two things are equal. And I don't think anything is actually equal. I think you could find, even in formatting, one that is better than the other. And so it really forces you to do that. Okay, what if you have a very small group? If you have a very small group, this might not be the tool to use. It might be better just to have them swap assignments if you only have like 4 people. But it could still be, I've done it with 20 and it works well. To try to, okay, yeah, I answered that. Okay. Okay. Are there any other questions just before? Maybe that's it. Maybe I'll just talk about grading and stuff because I've been talking about the algorithm a bit. Maybe there's some time to talk about that. How do you manage some plagiarism issue? So there is the opportunity for students and people to flag. We don't have it attached to turn it in or anything like that. But you could just take things and put them into to turn it in. But there is a flagging system where if a student finds something is up, you can do it. But yeah, I've only had one. I guess I've only found one case of plagiarism. I think, yeah, it's a good question though. I think it would be the same way that you would deal with plagiarism if you had paper assignments or assignments submitted to a system like Canvas, but we don't have anything that's sophisticated like Turnitin. Yeah, that answers your question. It's a good question and a big concern. Yeah. Often the way that I handle plagiarism in one of the things is it's the synthesis of this problem, which is important, and we all come up with the answer together. So that I guess somebody could plagiarize the synthesis, but then it might, if two assignments are very similar, it's likely with the algorithm turned on, they'll get put side by side, and then somebody will be like, hey, wait a minute. And that's actually happened before. That's how we've caught stuff. But maybe I'll just go. So I'll go into some. I should say this isn't all the research, and it's limited research. Yeah, no problem. Well, yeah, I just try to be honest here. I'm not trying to sell anything, right? It's an open source. It's a free thing, so I might as well be honest what it's used for. So students think it's good for learning. So I'll go through these things. Yeah, Liz, that's a great, yeah. Student think it's good for learning. It might actually be good for learning. The education and comparisons, they do look like they're good for learning. It's very hard to measure. So I'll talk about an attempt we had to try to measure that. And then I'll talk about like mapping this ranking to traditional grading and whether that's worthwhile or not. So there's this paper at the bottom here, this paper that we did, just sort of introducing the tool and talking about some student feedback we got. So there is the caveat here that this is self-reported data from students. So students, they feel that they're learning the most while the comparing is happening, which I find very encouraging. And they don't learn so much actually doing the assignment, like actually writing it out and submitting it. They learn from the classroom discussion. And in this case, the classroom discussion is that piazza discussion that we're having. They learn less from the feedback that they get from peers or from me. And they don't learn as much giving the feedback. It's really where the comparisons, while they're actually doing the comparisons, which I think is pretty cool. But of course, this is self-reported, right? And students think it's useful. This is honestly self-reported, and it's my ability to do this, evaluate my peer answers, my ability to evaluate my own answer. So this is sort of a confidence on a Likert scale, right? So this is interesting, but it is student opinion, right? So we tried actually measuring actual learning. So this was done with me, Pam Callis at UBC, and Beth Volpov, who was a PhD student in ecology at UBC. So one of the things in biology, so this was done in Science 1 in this cohort program, and one of the things they're teaching biology, and meiosis is an incredibly complicated subject and a thing that often has a lot of misconceptions associated with it. So there's this meiosis concept inventory that the biologists have that essentially, how well do you know this? So we had them do the pretest. They did a worksheet on mitosis, not meiosis, but they did this worksheet where this conflation often happens maybe because the words are so similar. I'm not a biologist, so I won't be able to actually talk about the details of where things go wrong. I'm just sort of presenting what we did here. They're then given this worksheet on meiosis, and we didn't give them any feedback on this. What we instead had them do in class was they submitted a picture of their worksheet. So one group submitted a picture of their worksheet, and then they just got the answer key, and they had maybe 20 minutes to study the answer key. And one of the things about meiosis is they're pictures and drawings of processes. So there's a lot going on. Group 2 took their pictures of meiosis, their meiosis worksheet, and they submitted to ComPAIR, and they just did the comparisons, and then they looked at the feedback they received. And then we did the meiosis concept inventory right after that. So right after doing this exercise. Yeah, that's right, Tamara. That's another thing, is just having people look at other people's work is hugely valuable. So the thing about this is that both groups had the same increase in their test score, 21%. And so I guess that's interesting. But I think the notable thing about it is the students who did ComPAIR never actually saw the real answers to the worksheet. They only saw things that their peers had submitted. So if nothing else, doing ComPAIR in terms of this concept inventory was as good as getting the actual answers, even though you never actually saw them, and it took the same time. So it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell how real this is, and it's hard to tell if this is just a test-retest effect, right? Which we know is a big effect. Just in any test, people do it multiple times, they'll do better on it. But this is the best sort of these places with gray area. This is where this tool really shines, I think. One thing I just want to talk about is we've tried to see if the ranking generated from the adaptive comparative judgment can actually be used for grading in any reliable way. And I want to make the thing, so this, it doesn't map to traditional grading. So traditional grading is when some TAs, they grade a project, they grade it out of 10. If they give a grade, and then I'll explain the experiments. Maybe that's the easier thing to do. So for a bunch of courses, we had students submit assignments, and we had TAs actually just grade everything. And then we had the TAs actually go through ComPAIR and come up with a ranking. So that just the TAs were using ComPAIR to grade student solutions. So it wasn't the students that were grading stuff, it was just the TAs. And what we find is that for some courses, the TA grade and the TA compare score, so TA1 compare score is the ranking that comes out of that. And so we rank them by their grades like this, and we rank the ranking. We get an R of 0.7, and that's the highest one. And here's a TA grade with TA2 compare. And then here's the TA grade. And when it's the TA grade, it's both TA grades put together. So that one gave it 7 out of 10, the other gave it 6 out of 10, and we took the average. And here's that TA grade compared to students. So none of these, like we'd like for good inter-rater reliability for R to be very high, like above 9, I think, 0.9. But we never got it very high. So this is just a thing to note, is that it doesn't map to what we would consider traditional grading. And here in this other course, which was this third year course, this ISci, it ranked even less. And this opens up a really interesting question, is because, well, maybe if I go to the next one. So if we use the TA grade as the gold standard of if one assignment is a 7 and one is a 6, the one with the 7 is better than the one with the 6, right? What we see is that when the students do it and the TAs do actual ranking, like the ranked list generated by a TA doing all of them, or students doing. I should just say when the TA does this, they have to look at like 100 assignments, right? Because they're doing it for literally everybody in the course, right? They're doing a ton of comparisons. So what's the point I'm trying to make here? The point I'm trying to make is that when a TA grades the thing, they give something a different ranking than if they look at the things side by side and they decide, well, this one, I gave it a higher score before and I gave this one a lower score, but now it's reversed and I'm giving the one that I gave a lower score the higher score now that I see them side by side. And so the thing that sort of bothers me is, shouldn't the direct comparison be way better? And shouldn't it be way more accurate if you're just looking at this one being better than that one? So it makes me really think about traditional grading and what it's good for. And maybe this is just very different, maybe a very different way of grading. And maybe it's not important that it doesn't map to traditional grading. Because traditional grading has a lot of flaws. Anyway, so that's sort of where, and so that's my whole sort of presentation. So I'll leave it with that. And yes, thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, thank you, Liz. Yes, for sure. It also opens up a question about how hard actual grading is. Like, are TAs actually good at grading, right? Is a prof actually good at grading? That's a hard, right? Like where does that level come in when you're good enough? Yeah. But yeah, I'll open it to questions and maybe I'll leave that here. Yeah. Yeah, Daniel.
I think that last point is tremendously interesting, and you probably had this experience of like I find I grade differently if it's the first in the batch versus the last in the batch, and I'm tired, and
sure.
Then a student asks me to explain why they got the mark, and I go back and I look at it and I give it a different mark the second time. Okay, I would give it a 7 and not a 5.
Yeah,
and
totally.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say that it's completely arbitrary, but I know that there are studies like, for example, like judges will be less lenient on somebody if it's before lunch versus after lunch, and there's all these cognitive biases that we bring to the grading process.
Yeah, and I should point out that the TAs had really high inter-rater reliability between each other and their ranking. But they were using a rubric. So maybe the rubric is pointing out very certain things that allow us to get a very reliable grade, but maybe not a true grade because the rubric is missing some other aspect that maybe the comparisons are hinting at. Yeah, it's a great point though. It's one of the things in grading, right? You grade the first two and then you're on like the 5th one and you're like, and you go back to the first one, you're like, I gotta change this grade because everything's changed now. Yeah.
Well, and actually part of, sometimes when I'm grading something, it takes me a few examples in order to determine like, well, what is a 75 on this?
Totally.
I suppose, this is sort of an implicit process that we as teachers are doing. We're doing that comparison already to then try to translate it to a mark.
Totally. Yeah, great point. Yeah, Liz,
Yeah, that's a fascinating question that you're opening up, James. And I'm hoping that there's somebody in the crowd here. Do you want to go back to full screen and not share screen so that
sure, yeah,
people,
sorry, yeah.
No worries. Because maybe we can invite people to open up their videos so we can see them and see their frowns and because I love things like this that are provocative. You know, you've raised, you're allowing us to raise a question that I think many of us, especially those people who are, you know, currently interested in equity, diversity, and inclusion, might want to be asking themselves. And, you know, you have a tool that could allow us to ask that kind of question. Are we, you know, is there some kind of implicit bias that we have in, you know, when we know a lot about the context and about who's providing you with, you know, with an answer, compared to when you compare these, you know, these answers without context of, you know, who it is, and, you know, and what they may have brought or not brought. Or if you are, you know, all of the physiological things that, you know, Daniel was talking about, which is, you know, you're hungry, you know, it's before lunch, it's after lunch, you know, you're tired, you've graded 100 of these, and now, you know, the 101st one is like, oh my God, you know, I should start back again, you know, because I realize I'm not being consistent. And, you know, I think this is a really interesting thing. And I'm going to sort of point to some of my colleagues. I know that McGill has the grading system that you use. It's, you know, it's an entire, I don't remember, Tamara, you're here. And what's it called again? Crowdmark.
Yeah.
Because Crowdmark has, you know, you insert your rubric, and I'm assuming, you know, at UBC you have something similar. So there's a lot of evidence of, you know, consistency and things like that that maybe could be improved.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we use Gradescope, which is, I think, similar to Crowdmark in many ways. But yeah, it's a question that I've been, after seeing that data, I was really surprised. And I don't really quite know what to make of it, which is why I'm bringing it up, because it does fit into this whole sort of idea, like, you know, should we be giving our students grades even, right? You know, we've thought a lot about that. Remember in Science 1, because students have such anxiety coming out of high school into first year, we were trying to do, could we go with a gradeless first semester and just give feedback and just take the weight off of that? And I think it sort of fits into that question, which you're right, does have all these equity issues. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Hi. So really very fascinating on so many levels, and I would be really curious about seeing how this tool could be used to actually develop assessments. Like if you take, you know, going from the point of like what the learning objectives are, and then actually working comparatively to develop assessments. I teach in the arts, and sometimes it can be nebulous territory in terms of like different sections of the same course. And we're in courses where we have multiple sections taught by different people, we're trying to do collaborative grading and trying to build our rubrics together. But I think using this tool for ourselves to actually, you know, compare our ideas and develop would be really interesting.
Yeah, so yeah, it's a good, just to talk about some of the, like the actual like physical aspects of the program. So you can obviously run it and have students from all sections submit, but you can also break up the groups. So, you know, students from all sections could submit, but students from one section only see students work from that one section. If you know, if the assignments were so different that the comparisons might not be useful. But yeah, it's an interesting idea, and it's one of the reasons why Tiffany was so interested in this idea, is how do you get it real feedback and get really at the heart of it when you do have these things that have a lot more gray area in first year than, say, a first year calculus course, right? Yeah, I'm just sort of looking through chat. Could you take old exams and plug in answers and compare faculty? I would love to do that. There's a lot of things that I would love to do. The pandemic, unfortunately, a lot of our people, like Letitia, they work in our Center for Teaching, Learning and Technology. Their focus dramatically shifted, obviously, during the pandemic, and but we'd like to start getting back at this and thinking of these kind of questions. I just see a question from Dina in chat, and then I'll answer. I'll ask. So from a technical perspective, the best people to talk to, actually, there's an email here. Let me. The best people are. I can't highlight things right now. My fingers stopped working. So this is our Google group, and it'll connect with the people working on this. I have to say, because of the pandemic, the people working on this now are sort of working on the side of their desk, and even before the pandemic they were, and so now they're quite stretched quite thin. You can set this up just as a local server. We have a teacher, a high school teacher in Vancouver, who just set up their own installation, and they use it for their students, just in their class. So it is something that a single person can set up and use. But at the other institutions, mostly they go through IT, and those IT folks work with our folks from CTLT. Yeah. Sorry, 2 other questions disappeared, and maybe I answered them. Liz, did you have a question, or?
Well, I was going to make a comment that
Okay.
well, Beth lowered her hand, but yeah, I just wanted to make a comment that maybe we can go back to instead of the technical questions, maybe a question or some thoughts from you about how you might use ComPAIR. We have a few minutes to talk about that, because maybe some of your ideas might spark other people's ideas for how they might try this. And we mentioned earlier, if you didn't read the chat, Michael Dugdale is trying out an instance of a local server. So if that works, then Saltese could look into trying to do something and host something locally for people in Montreal. So Beth, or anybody else, can you think of ways you could use this idea of comparing, apart from what we sort of just leaked from talking about getting better rubrics, and the validity of our grading.
I was just going to comment on from the student's perspective. One of the things I struggle with is my tech students in particular to understand what a good answer is. So when I say explain or rationalize or list, I get a very wide range of what they consider to be a full explanation. And I think by having them compare each other's answers to that type of question would be much more informative for them than when I give them back the comments, because I will, I'm always asking for more things in the pen and to explain this, but for them to actually read an answer from another student, I think that's where the happiness for me would come from, because it would be the learning in action for them, just seeing and comparing each other's answers. And even in this silly film example, when I looked at 2, I was like, oh, I didn't think to include the year for my movie. Or so I think it made my reflection back. And I think in courses where we ask the same types of questions over and over again, which I happen to do in pathophysiology, it's always explain why the disease happens. The structure of an answer, that's a huge skill for students to be able to build off of. And I think this would be a fantastic way to do it in a it's a safe space for them to do it as well, because it's anonymous. Yeah. Thank you.
Phoebe, go ahead.
I'll
And then Daniel.
speak. Actually, James, I just wanted to clarify something that I saw you talk about, and I saw it on the sandbox, but it wasn't in the video question. Teachers can set up the peer work to be compared in more than one axis, right? So you could, is there a number you can specify?
Yeah, so you can add as many as you want. Maybe I'll just, do you want me to show you sort of what like one of my courses looks like and what that, I guess the simple answer is yes. So for instance, for the physics assignment, I have them do it on four axes, and it's really aligned. In this class, Physics 333, I use Poy's method for problem solving. And so what they're doing is really looking at a student's submission and seeing how well they align with some aspects from Poy's method of problem solving, which involves executing the plan, stating assumptions, looking at the reflection. So each of these is a different axis. Like, does it look right is one of them. Which one has a better introduction? Which one has a better reflection? Stuff like that.
Great, thanks. Danielle, I think you're next.
I'm just trying to think off the top of my head here, but one area where it might be interesting, somebody mentioned art before, and nebulous was the adjective that was used. And I often will give my students the option of doing like a creative expression of their understanding, like they're not a formal essay, but so well, if you have multimedia skills or musical skills, then try to express your understanding through that medium. I mean, it becomes difficult then when I evaluate it, because the students sometimes ask, well, you know, what's a 95 and what's a 90? And I'm like, well, just come to my office afterwards and see all the projects side by side, and you'll be able to tell, like, you know, it's not that one is better than the other, but it's like there are some answers that are maybe more complete. So that might be actually an interesting exercise to just put, I mean, I like to think of it in competitive terms of like, you know, battle royale to see whose art project comes out on top, right? But it could be illustrated for them in terms of what a quality art project might need to include.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. But one of the things that this has been used for is in engineering for prototyping. People put up their rough prototyping ideas, and it's like just to see, okay, everyone's got prototypes for the different things, which is the best prototype. And those are often similarly like, well, like the drawing that I showed you, right? I had this idea and I have this picture and I didn't know how to, they asked me to write something. And of course, Tiffany, being the English literature prof, was able to articulate what she wanted very well. I wasn't. I needed to draw a picture. And so I think it'd be great for that kind of stuff. Yeah. Yeah, Monica.
I have a question about process. And when after they complete sort of the comparison and assessment, do they get to resubmit the assignment with whatever they learned from the process of comparison, or? So
that's part of my design philosophy. Is it does that one thing, and if you want them to resubmit, you just make a new assignment and have them do it again. Okay. But it's not built into like the flow of compare. I had another idea and it just flitted away related to that. It was related to a comment earlier, but maybe it'll come back. But yeah, so a lot of the process things are left for the instructor to facilitate, which I think is important, because if there's too much that's built into the software, then you can't use it the way you want to potentially. And so really the goal is to make it as you use it any way you want, but it happens outside. There's the stuff that happens in your class outside the software. Yeah. Carmen. Yeah.
Hi, yes, James. Sorry, I came late, so I'm not too sure if this is covered. I came from another meeting. So when you mentioned that this was used for our engineering course and they're showing designs, is there a way to provide feedback during the comparisons, like directly annotate on drawings, or You can only enter
No.
text and
You can only
equations.
You can only enter text and equations. And so both, this was something unexpected that came out of this. At first it was a limitation, and now I see it as a strength. Because honestly, there are other pieces of software. You can take pictures, yeah, you can put pictures in it, but you can't annotate on that picture and say this part of your picture right here. In the feedback, you might be able to screenshot and do it and then put a picture back. But there are like Peer Scholar, I think is what it's called, allows people to very detailed annotate submissions. Whereas I think one of the virtues of ComPAIR is that because you can't be so specific and you can't really get into their assignment, the feedback is much more big picture and broad scope. And it's much more about like structural elements rather. And Tiffany in particular talked about this because, you know, when students grade each other's work, particularly in first year, look, it's always like, oh, you missed a comma here, or that's not how you use a semicolon. And that doesn't really matter. What matters is your idea good or bad? Is it articulated well? And that stuff is not only difficult, not only scary to say to a person, but it's difficult. And we find that not giving the ability to even do that means that the feedback that comes out of ComPAIR is more sort of broad, big picture.
Yep, see that.
And I think an important key thing is, in just like what Beth mentioned, is the learning really happens when the comparisons are happening. The feedback is just sort of there to, you know, it's just there like a MacGuffin to make everything sort of happen, right? But the comparisons are what's really where things are happening.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much.
Yeah, JF, Jean-Francois. Do you go by JF file? I have a friend named Jean-Francois, and so I call him JF.
It depends which crowd I'm with usually.
Okay.
I'm not too picky about it.
Okay, sorry. I just saw it and I was like, it's just muscle memory or mouth memory, whatever. Yeah.
All this discussion about like the comparing all the grader and all of this.
Yeah.
Maybe wonder, is there a way for the teacher to pre-populate the answers that the students will be comparing? I was looking at the setting and then.
Yeah, not yet. So one of the great virtues of having the evaluation team from the very beginning is they had a feeling they were going to want to do stuff like this. So the evaluation team can work with the programmers to set up instances of ComPAIR that can do very weird things, and to do all these little games that we've been playing to actually the open source one that we release, the release version, does not have the ability to pre-populate. But I do see the advantage. It would be great if you could pre-populate with a bunch of good answers and bad answers and have students see what is good and what is bad. And but it's not something that's built into the actual software. What you could do though is give students a bunch of answers and have them put them in and then compare, right? And then go through and compare. So that would be the sort of hack. This is my philosophy. It's something you can facilitate outside. Yeah.
Hacking around, I love that. That's great.
Yeah.
Thanks for the trick.
Yeah, no problem. Daniel, the comparisons don't happen right away. There's an opportunity for everybody to compare. So that's how I like to set it up. And I never use it with the comparisons starting right off the bat. But it is a thing. You notice we do it in the sandbox, obviously, but it's not something that we've really worked out. The thing that we spent a lot of time doing was making sure the user interface was really intuitive on both the student and the instructor side, and making sure it was very robust and did this one thing very simply. So if people are worried, like the engineering course that we used it in is 900 people using this thing at once, right? So and the first year English course, English 110 is like 1,700 people. So it can handle that. That's really what we were working on, is making sure this thing could handle volume and just work. There's nothing more I dislike than a tool that doesn't work. So these special features are things that we would love to do, but you know, our limited ability to our limited resources are focused on just making it robust.
I'm looking at the time and I'm seeing no hands up and no new chats. Well, there's new chats, but they're not questions. James, this has been fascinating. And as I can see, I myself included, I think a lot of us are really excited to actually try this, get our hands on it. The sandbox is a good place for us to start too. Maybe we can try the instructor view and see what that's like as well.
Yeah,
yeah.
Go into the instructor view. You can see all the options and stuff. Yeah. Well, thank you. This has been a ton of fun. This is great. Thank you for the invitation.
I know that Schultes is going to stay in touch for sure. Sue, there was a survey. I know you posted it, but maybe you can put it in the chat one more time.
Yeah, we'll do. Thank you.
Participants, if you don't mind taking a couple minutes to complete it, I believe it's a very short survey about your experience today, so we can tailor our next webinars better for you. It would be appreciated. And thanks everyone for coming today. It's been very interesting. Thanks, James, once again.